Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics, our regular review of all the week's political news live on KMTV. On this week's show, we'll be looking at how more women can be encouraged to stand for election after Labour revealed it was imposing all-women shortlists on nearly 50 of its top target seats. And as data shows more than a tenfold rise in obesity over the past 4 decades, are we doing enough to get children and adults physically active? With me on the sofa to discuss all this are the Chatham and Aylesford MP and Sports Minister Tracey and Labour Councillor for Gillingham and former parliamentary candidate Naushabah Khan. Thanks to both of them for joining us. First, Louisa Britton looks at whether positive discrimination is needed to boost the number of women going into politics.
The constituency of Dover and Deal is the only seat in Kent and Medway that's been told to choose a female candidate, and the decision's not gone down well with local activists. Party chiefs say they're trying to boost the number of female MPs so that Parliament has an equal balance. But do women in politics need the extra help? Let's have a look at the numbers. At the last general election, 208 women were elected as MPs. That makes up 32% of all representatives in the House of Commons. Since women have been allowed to stand for office in 1918, almost 500 have been elected as members of Parliament. In the highest ranks, the current government has 6 women in the cabinet, including the Prime Minister. At a local level, 32% of local authority councillors in England are women, and representing us in Europe, 41% of UK MEPs are women. The Conservatives ruled out the use of all-women shortlists in 2016, with the party chairman Patrick McLaughlin saying the party preferred to give local associations the freedom to choose who they wanted. In Kent, 5 of the 17 MPs are women: Tracey for Chatham and Aylesford, Kelly Tolhurst for Rochester and Strood, Helen Whately is MP for Faversham and Mid-Kent, ROSIE DUFFIELD in Canterbury is the only Labour MP, and Helen Grant represents Maidstone and the Weald. But what do you think of all women shortlists and other positive discrimination efforts to balance gender mathematics?
I think it's totally patronising. All positions, wherever it's in politics, in business, should be by merit only and not because of your gender. I think it's very patronising.
I think really the best person for the job. I believe in a meritocracy essentially. I mean, at the same time, I do understand where minority groups are coming from.
I think probably best that whoever's fit for the job and whoever can do the job is qualified and has experience should be really taken on, really, not sort of saying, oh, it's got to be so many women or so many men or whatever.
So although I can understand that we need more women in politics, it's just up to us to stand up on our own 2 feet and fight against the male-dominated profession who still seem to see us as second-class citizens.
Well, Naushabah Khan, mixed views there, but one important point is that people are saying if you want to be a politician, get elected on merit rather than being given help up by all-women shortlists.
Yeah. Well, I think, Paul, I mean, I really find the whole all-women shortlist concept a really interesting one. And personally, from my personal view, I don't feel that all-women shortlist is a long-term answer to getting more equality in Parliament or in top jobs.
So what is?
The problem is, well, I think there's lots of things that we need to be doing. We need to be looking at why less women are in politics or in top jobs in lots of industries. There was a BBC report recently that showed there's only a third of top jobs have ever had women in them. But my issue is that when we have the meritocracy argument, we say, well, you should be in there on merit. But when you look across the board and you see the gaps, what that's therefore suggesting is that women have failed, and therefore that's the reason why they've never quite made it in the past, because based on the best person for the job has got it, and by virtue of not being good enough, women haven't made it. And I don't for a minute believe that to be true. And I think that's what highlights to me that there is a problem in particular industries and in politics, and that something needs to be done about it.
Tracey, your party did look at the idea of all-women shortlists and then decided not to go ahead with it. What's your view? It's a bit of a blunt tool, but it does work.
Well, I'm against all women shortlists. I would say that, wouldn't I? I'd certainly feel like I've achieved what I've achieved on merit. And of the 5 Kent MPs, none of us were selected on all women shortlists. I do think that we do have to do more to encourage women into politics at all levels of politics. I would certainly like to see, far more female councillors on our local authorities. I'd love to see more women as MPs across Kent. But I think that we have to do that through a process of making people more aware of what politics is about, how we can support them. We have support networks to help female candidates and indeed female MPs, but that's very different to having all women shortlists.
What about the machismo kind of atmosphere you see at the House of Commons? Do you think that's a deterrent that puts women off?
I actually don't really see that, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that actually the Westminster in itself can be quite a brutal environment. It's not always men on women. Sometimes it's women on women as well. So
or men on men.
Or women on men. So it is actually a sort of kind of quite a hostile environment. You'd expect that. It's a debating chamber. But I do think that there are certain things that we can do in Parliament to try and improve actually the atmosphere for everybody, not just for women.
Naushabah, what do you think about the idea that women are put off because of they see this kind of fairly aggressive atmosphere in the House of Commons?
I have to say, personally, it's not something that I've necessarily said has put me off from putting myself forward in politics. And as Tracey pointed out, it's a debating chamber and you expect to see some to and fro coming through. I think there are other issues with the way that politics is and some of the issues that exist, some of the long working hours, that's not only in politics but other jobs that potentially could not encourage women to put themselves forward.
Tracey, you took maternity leave, and what was amazing about that, you were the first minister to take maternity leave.
I was the first Conservative minister.
And in a way that kind of does underline that there's an issue there, isn't it? Because people are, wow, a minister's taking maternity leave.
Well, I think actually that was more of a reflection on the Conservative Party than ministers per se, because actually Labour Party had in the past had younger female politicians who had become ministers who took maternity leave, but clearly, the Conservative Party had been behind in that, and I think that's changed enormously. I have a huge number of younger colleagues now, female colleagues who are pregnant now or have been, so I may have been the first, but I certainly won't be the last. But I do think the issue they put around actually making Parliament more family friendly, I think, is a significant concept. I don't see my son for 3 nights a week. That's not unique to politics, but it is something that is quite I do want to touch on this problem with social media abuse and the inquiry that's going on. Do you think more action in that area needs to be considered? I do, but I don't. Again, that's not unique to female politicians.
I think they do get the brunt of it, though. I do think that there tends to be this trend where it seems to be easier to send that type of vitriol to female politicians and also make it quite nasty quite quickly in sort of quite a sexually graphic way as well.
I think that's the difference. Is that I think male MPs get trolled, but it's a sort of kind of death threat, whereas women MPs get rape threats. And I think that's a sort of kind of, there's much more sexual violence against women.
And it is off-putting. If you're a young woman looking at that, you think, actually, I'd rather not have that.
OK, well, we'll see what the inquiry comes out with when it reaches its findings. Now, moving on, if there is one issue dominating politics, it's Brexit, which rarely seems to be out of the headlines. Away from Brussels and those negotiations, however, there are more pressing problems for Kent. This week, the sitting Bourne and Sheppey MP Gordon Henderson took up the cudgels at Westminster to demand more action against foreign hauliers who sleep in their cabins. Duarte Diaz has the story.
Image we'd all rather forget. Lines of lorries parked along the motorway during Operation Stack. But even when this protocol is not in place, HGV lorries parked along the roads are still an issue in Kent. Many foreign drivers park over the weekend in the UK because the fines for doing so are smaller than in Europe. As the gateway to the continent, Kent takes the hit for the country. MP Gordon Henderson brought this up in Parliament during the week.
Now, even where parking restrictions do apply, taking action isn't always simple. Where fines are imposed, too often they're ignored by foreign drivers who simply don't pay. In addition, where suitable parking facilities do exist, and they are few and far between, the police simply don't have the resources to escort the lorries to those designated areas.
He was quickly followed by Helen Watley, whose constituency of Faversham and Mid-Kent is also right in the middle of it all.
Making sure that enforcement of lorries parking in the right place is effective, and that needs to go hand in hand with making sure that there are places for lorries to park, the Operation Stack lorry park and further lorry parks on the route, as he is saying.
I would like to see an increase in the level of fines for those breaking the law and give the police more resources to assist the DVSA in issuing those fines. And we should move quickly to provide lorry parks needed in Kent.
Well, Tracey, there is always discussion and criticism when Operation Stack hits Kent. But, you know, Brexit itself might give the UK more powers to resolve this issue.
Well, I'm not sure that Brexit's particularly relevant to Operation Stack. Operation Stack is hugely inconvenient for the county. We lose a lot of money. It costs a lot of money, and I think actually the sooner that we can come up with a solution for Operation Stack, the better. I
mean, do you agree that the lorry park is the best way forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I work very closely with Charlie, the two Damians, and both the Helens to make sure that actually we are dealing with this. My constituency, it has two motorways going through it. I have a lot of logistic and freight firms that are based in the constituency. They lose a significant amount of income every time we have Operation Stack.
OK, well, I'm afraid we have to cut short that particular debate today, but when we come back, we'll be discussing whether we are on the right track when it comes to encouraging greater participation in sport and physical activity. Don't go away. Hello and welcome back to Paul on Politics, live on KMTV with our guests Tracey Crouch and Naushabah Khan. Now, despite some impressive successes in recent months for our elite sports teams and athletes, are we doing enough to encourage participation in physical activity? Before we get on to that though, Kent welcomed a visit by the Olympic medal-winning British gymnastics team. Cameron Tucker reports.
After gripping the nation and sending records tumbling in Rio last summer, gymnastics has taken off across Kent and country. The bar's been raised at the PEGASUS Gymnastics Club in Maidstone, where two members of the Team GB side competing in Montreal train and coach.
Everybody's really proud of the gymnasts and the coaches to be at that level of gymnastics. I think the World Championships in Montreal has again boosted the publicity for not just us as a club but for gymnastics as a whole, and I think it will help the sport evolve even more than it already has, whether it be through funding, so it gives even more opportunities and it comes down to the clubs from British Gymnastics, the governing body, or whether it's just more opportunities that we can give as people get more interested.
The sport's rise is one of the lasting legacies from the London Olympics and has been further cemented by the success at last year's Games. More than 90,000 participate in the sport across the UK, up from 72,000 before London 2012. Retention's been a challenge within the sport, but that's beginning to change.
There are more opportunities in gymnastics now than there were a few years ago, and we encourage as many different age groups and abilities as we can to either take up gymnastics at whatever age or to stay in the sport.
All of the gymnasts here have been training since preschool, and for the older ones, they too have seen the sport transform.
When I first started it, the sport was less known compared to now. After 2012, the great results, the sport became more involved with the BBC and coverage, and I know a lot more people know a lot more about it now than they did when I first started.
It's very good to have Courtney and James where they're at such a high standard that we can look up to them and we know that we can get there because they are there at the moment. So like where they're up at Canada, it's like amazing to see that we've got people there.
More of my friends are like asking me about gymnastics. You know, they all know Max Whitlock and that. So
there's definitely more of an interest in the sport.
Definitely.
Gymnastics is currently scaling new heights in terms of popularity and success on a national and regional level. Courtney Tulloch and James Hall may be flying the flag for club and country in Canada at the moment, but the young gymnasts here in Maidstone's PEGASUS Club will be hoping to emulate their heroes in the near future. Cameron Tucker, KMTV, Maidstone.
Well, Tracey Crouch, it's great having these national successes in various events, but do you sometimes think that might put people off? They love watching elite sports, but they think, I could never do that.
No, I don't think that at all. I think the great thing about having these successes is that they do go on and inspire the next generation. You heard one of the young men there talk about Matt Whitlock. I mean, he has done a huge amount to show to young boys that actually gymnastics is cool. I spend a lot of my time trying to encourage girls into sport, but actually the one thing about gymnastics and the success of the men's team at Rio and the World Championships is that they are getting a lot of young boys into gymnastics, and that's fantastic.
Do you think you got the balance right, in terms of competitive sport and general participation in terms of getting people physically active? Excuse me.
Well, I would say I would, because I'm the sports minister, and but I would say that.
Yes,
actually,
you would say that.
Yeah, I would say that. But we have got a long way to go. That's for sure. I know that we need to do far more work. We are seeing teenagers, in particular, drop out of sport.
Why do you think that is, particularly amongst girls?
It's a huge, complex issue, to be perfectly honest with you. It is about making sure that people understand about body image, because quite often girls in particular get very self-conscious, but also there is a point in the school career where people start to focus a lot more on their studies and sport becomes a secondary thing. So we need to make sure that youngsters remain physically active, but also other people, other generations, and I spend a lot of my time making sure that we have enough variety out there for the older generations, which is not just good for their physical well-being, but it's also good for reducing isolation, for example.
Naushabah, you like kickboxing. I don't know whether you still do it, so I'll keep my distance.
No, I just save it for Parliament now, don't I?
But, some of the barriers that Tracey's articulated that are very genuine.
Absolutely, and actually I can look back to my own time at school and I think things have changed significantly, but it did always feel like sports was really just for those who were super fit, particularly for the boys, and I went to an all-girls school and we were only really encouraged to play netball or hockey. Not that there's a problem with that, but it would be nice if we'd had some...
Do you think there are the opportunities out there, beyond school for girls to
There are. I think there are, but I think as a young teenager, you very rarely go out there and try and find that unless you're very, very interested. And actually, what happens when you have role models like that come into the school and talk to you about what they're doing, it really inspires you. It's like any other career that you're going for or any other job. Sports, if you can see someone that you can look up to and think, yes, I could do that, it makes a big difference.
So I was going to say my challenge as sports minister is to make sure that we develop a habit of sport at a very early age. That's actually done by Department for Education. School sport is separate from my remit. But what we want to see is that easy transition from school into outside clubs. And there are a huge number of very complex reasons why we don't necessarily have this perfect situation at the moment.
I did just want to ask about the number of allegations of abuse of top athletes in some of our sports. We've seen quite a lot of that. That must worry you in terms of putting people off.
Well, I think there's, firstly, and this sounds like a sort of slightly bizarre thing to say, but I think it is good that more people are coming forward in terms of reporting these allegations. What it does show, though, is that we haven't yet got all the safeguarding practices in place. Do
you think there's an institutional aspect to this?
No, I think that many of the allegations that we saw in football were historic, and actually we have seen a huge amount of progress since those historic allegations. I mean, what we need to remember actually, and particularly in the football allegations, was that the Children's Act only came into being in 1989, which protected children for the first time, enshrined in law the protection against abuse. What we're seeing today, though, is slightly different allegations at elite sport around culture, so bullying, for example, and that is something that we need to take very seriously.
OK, I'm afraid we've got to move on. Time's against us, as it always is. So finally, do you live in one of the UK's happiest towns, or are you consigned to suburban gloom and misery? A survey has suggested that one town in Kent is amongst the most joyful, and you might be surprised to find out where residents are most content. KMTV's Andy Richards spoke to the Mayor of Tunbridge Wells. I've given it away. And he started by asking her, what makes it such a nice place to live?
It's an attractive town. It's not boring. It goes up and down. It's got parks. I mean, more parks than many, many other towns. Right in the middle, or you can walk to them. It's got a very good heritage, and lots of things, lots of old things, you look like old buildings. You can go on heritage walks. There are many, many nice places of interest, again, with a lot of history near us, such as Penshurst Place, Hever Castle and so on. So it's not just the town, it's the whole area is lovely. The whole borough actually is a gorgeous borough. It's in an area of outstanding natural beauty, which of course has its problems when when planning regulations want us to build lots of new houses. But what I really like best are the people. They are absolutely amazing. This year, I'm mayor. Just this year, I'm mayor of Tunbridge Wells, and I've had the chance to go out and meet so many people who are actually passionate about Tunbridge Wells, and many of them are volunteers, and they are giving their time free, and they are achieving so much. It's absolutely amazing.
Because Naushabah Khan, I'm sure you're going to vote for somewhere different. So tell me where you think the best place in Kent is to live.
Of course, Medway, and where I was born and brought up here.
And what does Medway have over the disgusted people of Tunbridge Wells?
I think Medway's got so much going for it. I mean, it's a great place to live. We've got great connections out into the capital, but we've also got some of our own brilliant institutions, including universities. We've got green spaces. We've got great sports facilities. Not just saying that because Tracey's sitting next to me. But, I was born and brought up in Medway, and I've always loved sort of living here and being able to, I really feel part of a community. So, of course, I would vote for...
What makes a nice mixed community for you?
Well, I think it's a variety of things, isn't it? It's being able to go to your neighbour's house and have a cup of tea, but it's also being able to go to sports clubs and join different groups and have activities, but also just feeling that you're in a place where things are happening, things are going on, there's something exciting to go and look at. We've got some great new things that have happened in Medway. We've got lots of cultural experiences. We've got fantastic history, which is brilliant.
You should work for the tourist board. So, now, Tracey, you kind of straddle Medway and Kent in some senses, so you got split loyalties over your favourite part of the county?
Well, the one thing I would say is I don't agree with this Tunbridge Wells malarkey, because every time I go to Tunbridge Wells I sit in a queue for ages, so both getting in and out. Yeah. But the one thing I will say about Medway is that it quite often features in the top places to live, because we've got great commuter links into the city. We do have some fantastic facilities. We're open up to the whole of the county.
The train service isn't that brilliant sometimes, is it?
Well, I'd say
there's always room for improvement.
And the one other advantage that we have over Tunbridge Wells is we don't have southern trains. So
it's true. We've got its sister southeastern.
Yeah, we don't have all the strikes.
Not at the moment.
So your vote goes to Medway, and your vote goes to...
No, my vote's going to go with Medway as well. But I think that it's definitely not Tunbridge Wells.
Well, that's a debate that's going to continue. That's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks to our guests for coming into the studio. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, you can catch up with all the latest political news by logging on to KentOnline.co.uk, following me on Twitter at Paul on Politics. Thanks for watching.